First, let's make it clear. This isn't going to be your average hate video about Borussia Dortmund on how they failed to take the next step after last year's Champions League final. I mean, they're bad, that's for sure. But the problem isn't just the 2024-25 season, it's much deeper than that. The obvious facts speak for themselves. They're out the German Cup, out of the Champions League, and they're currently sitting 7th in the Bundesliga, which is actually a huge upgrade given the fact that this is their highest position since matchday 15, which was like 4 months ago. So yeah, my point is that this is going to be another trophyless season for Dortmund. The trophy drought is getting worse and worse, as their last silverware came 4 years ago in 2022-21, when Dortmund won the DFB Pokal. But you know what's worrying? That even when Dortmund have gone trophyless in the past, they've at least made an impression. For example, 2012-13, probably not many of you remember, but even then, with the Champions League heroics against Malaga, then Real Madrid, the 4 goals from Lewandowski against Los Blancos, even that Dortmund team finished without a trophy. But it built a reputation as one of the best Borussia Dortmund teams in history. Or even in 2022-23, Dortmund were very good, led by the talent of Jude Bellingham, and were just 90 minutes away from the Bundesliga title. And even though they fell short, Dortmund made an impression with their togetherness and discipline. Whereas now, something just isn't clicking for Borussia. They are sluggish in attack, leaky in defence, and lacking in consistency, which are basically the 3 big factors behind their mediocre 2024-25 campaign. In fact, there's only been one 5-game run this season in which Borussia have avoided defeat, and that came in the first 5 games of the season. From the opening match against Phoenix Lübeck in the first round of the German Cup, all the way up to the 5-1 defeat to Stuttgart in the Bundesliga on the 22nd of September. Since then, and up until now, Borussia Dortmund have failed to register 5 consecutive games without conceding a loss. So, if you dig a little deeper, what's really so wrong with Dortmund? What is stopping them from becoming a European giant? Because, let's be real, nobody puts Dortmund in the same category as Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Liverpool, or Juventus. It may sound a bit exaggerated, but in a historical context, they're probably closer to the level of Lazio, Sevilla, and Tottenham than the biggest giants on the continent. Anyway, have you noticed the interesting trend that has emerged for Borussia Dortmund in the last 15 to 20 years? A lot of great talents have gone to Dortmund, stayed there for a few years, made a name for themselves, and eventually moved on to a bigger club for more glory, more silverware, and more money, and, of course, more exposure. And there are plenty of examples. Robert Lewandowski arrived in 2010, stayed for 4 seasons, left for Bayern Munich, and eventually won the treble a few years later. Erling Haaland arrived in 2019, stayed for 3 seasons, left for Man City, and won the treble in the first season in England. Jude Bellingham arrived in 2020, stayed for 3 seasons, left for Real Madrid, won the European double in his first season in Spain, and also lifted the Champions League literally yards away from his former teammates. You see where I'm going with this? And there are plenty more examples. Jadon Sancho, Christian Pulisic, Alexander Isak, Ousmane Dembele. The thing about Dortmund over the last 20 years at least is that every young top talent sees them as the perfect stepping stone to develop in a high level of competition and intensity, but without the pressure. Take all the players we've mentioned, Haaland, Sancho, Bellingham. None of them had any intention of marking an era in Germany by wearing the black and yellow. Each of them thought, okay, I'll play here for 3 or 4 seasons, 5 at the most, and then, when I'm ready for big football, I'll become a star at another club because there will be a lot of interest in me anyway. I'll be in my prime and have at least 8 to 10 years at the highest level. You see, nobody at Dortmund even thinks about becoming a legend. Even Lewandowski and Mario Götze, who were once tipped to become Dortmund legends, even they betrayed the yellow wall and joined arch-rivals Bayern Munich. And at the risk of getting into another topic, this is why players like Marco Reus will remain so deeply etched in people's memories, because of their heart, their passion, and their love for the beloved team. So yes, the problem with Dortmund is that nobody takes them seriously, both on and off the pitch. Everyone underestimates them when it comes to playing them in the Champions League, for example, and on the other hand, every talent sees them as another platform to help make a name for myself. Speaking of underestimation, the perfect example came last month against Barcelona. Everyone was so happy that they'd managed to inflict the first defeat on the Catalans in 2025 that they overlooked the fact that Barca only went there because they had to, not because they wanted to. They rotated their squad and played at a much slower pace than they're capable of. Basically, they just allowed Dortmund to play their game. And yet, even coach Niko Kovac, who should command respect, didn't forget to mention in his post-match interview that Dortmund played so well that they managed to become the first team to beat Barcelona in 2025. Well, you can say whatever you like in the comments, but that's a loser's mentality in my book. And I'm not saying this because I don't like Dortmund or anything. They're actually one of the most likeable teams out there. Their stadium, their passionate fans, the aura of this club is super magnetic, but I'm sure that they can go in a different direction and change their reputation as the Tottenham of the Bundesliga. Because, to get back to the main point, this strategy of selling your top players when they're at their best has had a very positive effect on Dortmund financially. The sales of Bellingham, Dembele and Sancho alone have netted the club over 300 million euros. So yeah, this is really the biggest question for Dortmund and its CEO Hans-Joachim Watzke, as well as for other notable clubs who sell their best players when their market value hits their peak, like Ajax and Benfica for example. What's your ultimate goal as a football boss? To make the most money and make the club bigger and bigger but without expanding your trophy cabinet? Or to actually bring joy and silverware to the fans? Because, if you look at things as an investor or financial analyst, selling an asset when its perceived value is highest is the best possible move. However, if your starting point is emotion, which is basically the main driving force in football, then Dortmund should rethink their approach. Buying young domestic or foreign talent, developing them into great players, building a strong squad and fighting for all the titles season after season is the right formula for success in football. Realistically, Borussia Dortmund have only managed to do this relatively successfully once in the 21st century, between 2011 and 2014, when Jurgen Klopp was in charge. During that time, Dortmund won back-to-back Bundesliga titles, won DFB Pokal, beat Bayern Munich 3 times in one season, and reached the Champions League final in 2013. But even then, the majority of the team and coaching staff were gone within 3 years of that successful period. So yeah, the point of talking about this strategy is to conclude that it actually worked for Dortmund. Nobody would argue that BVB were the best German club during Jurgen Klopp's reign, and their subsequent strategy of selling their best talents for big money seemed to be paying off, even if it didn't translate into new trophies for the team. But the really worrying thing is that based on what they've shown in the last 2 seasons, I really can't see Dortmund creating a similar or at least close to the dynasty of the early 2010s. Most of their squad is inexperienced after the departure of Hummels or Marco Reus. They have no natural leader in the squad. The coach they started the season with, Nuri Sahin, also lacked experience. Yes, things have improved a little bit in the last few weeks, but from a tactical point of view it definitely doesn't look good, especially in defence. I mean, you start Rami Bensebaini at left back against Lamine Yamal in the Champions League and you expect to do well. A serious injury to top centre back Nico Schlotterbeck hit the team hard in the closing stages of the season, but Dortmund were already through before the game even started. Or at least that was the feeling based on Dortmund's form and results this season. Okay, we mentioned that last term was also worrying for Dortmund, and that probably surprised many of you, as they played in the Champions League final. Of course, it's prestigious to play such a game after suffering for so long, and I can really applaud Borussia, but I can assure you that this was the least watched Champions League final in the last 10 years, because it was over before it started. I can't overlook the fact that Dortmund created some good chances in the first half, particularly through Adeyemi and Füllkrug, but it was almost impossible to win against Real Madrid.
They haven't even played well tonight.
Who were even described by commentator Martin Tyler as a team that didn't even play well tonight, and I completely agree with him. So, in my opinion, Dortmund had a bit of luck and were very organised defensively, which was the difference between them and Atletico Madrid and PSG in the quarters and semis respectively. After all, that was the speciality of Edin Terzic's game plan. Yes, it got results, especially in knockout competitions where you need to get results quickly. But when it came to keeping a rhythm over a 9-month season in the Bundesliga, Dortmund were once again far from the top. They finished 5th, 27 points behind champions Bayer Leverkusen. And for such a controversial topic, your opinion will always be respected. I know that you may not agree with some of the takes I made in this video, but you're free to argue with me in the comments below. So let's have a discussion. What is the biggest problem for Borussia Dortmund in your opinion? And do you think they're capable of competing for the Champions League and being a top European club like the best out there? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you've reached this far in the video, you are a complete legend and would be a pleasure for me to have you on my team. So why don't you click the subscribe button? Or maybe just check some of our latest uploads. I'll catch you in the next one on the blue card, and bye bye.